Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where in every episode we explore what is research culture and what should it be. You'll hear thoughts and opinions from a range of contributors to help you change research culture into what you want it to be.
Hello, it's Nick. So I'm back to talk a bit more about rights retention, this time with my colleagues Jonathan Horn and Jane Saunders. Like myself, Jonathan is another open research advisor based in research services in the library, with a focus on open access policy and funding, while Jane is a member of the library executive team, our associate director for content and discovery. So I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment in a bit more detail and say a bit about their roles and how it relates to rights retention. But just to say that this follows on from my recent conversation with John and Eva from Project Retain, a European project looking at this issue across Europe with case studies from 10 different countries, including the UK, and who published their second report at the end of March, which includes the N8 Research Partnership as one of those case studies, and of which, of course, Leeds is a member. So I'm interested today to talk to Jane and Jonathan about rights retention in a more local context, why it's important for researchers at Leeds, what are the implications for our academic colleagues, and what do they need to know. So if I can come to you first, Jonathan, and welcome to Research Culture Uncovered.
Thanks for having me. So I've worked in and around open access for the last 12 years now. I first started in a role here at Leeds that was titled the Open Access Project Assistant way back in 2013, when open access was just seen as a project. Thankfully, it's more of a full-time thing now. And my involvement with rights retention started with the introduction of the Wellcome Trust's open access policy, or the update to the Wellcome Trust's open access policy in 2021, when they first introduced their rights retention requirement. And since then, there's been a bit of a steady flow of policy updates off the back of that. So UKRI introduced their rights retention requirement in 2022, and then we followed suit with the University of Leeds publications policy in 2023.
Okay, thank you. And Jane, so you're our Associate Director for Content and Discovery. So what's your sort of interest and role as in respect to rights retention?
I suppose not necessarily in this role, but I go back a long way in terms of interest in the whole open access area. I mean, I remember back in the early 2000s when we were creating our White Rose Research online shared institutional repository, and the excitement that generated, and the feeling that we were on the cusp of making some big changes and really, making an impact in terms of getting research outputs more visible and out from behind paywalls. Obviously, it's been a really long journey since then. I came into this role of Associate Director for Content and Discovery. Gosh, I'm trying to think when. Must have been about eight years ago. And that was really at the time, around the time, I guess, of the first read and publish deals in the UK, these so-called transitional deals, which were really supposed to be moving that dial from paying for subscriptions to paying to publish as part of this open landscape. So in my role, looking after content and discovery, the information resources budget for the library sits in my area. So a huge chunk of that goes on the subscriptions to journal content. So yes, a large part of my working life over the last 8 years has been thinking about this transition, this move to open, and it really did feel like a kind of landmark moment when institutions across the UK and, Edinburgh first and then working across the N8 started to develop their rights retention policies. And I think another kind of significant moment was last year in 2024 when the JISC report reviewing the read and publish transitional deals came out, which showed that actually these deals haven't been affecting the transition that we were hoping for.
I think you both listened to the conversation I had with John and Eva, and that was one of the things that I was trying to pick up towards the end. I think was the fact that, as you say, it hasn't really transitioned. We're not quite sure why. I guess market forces, perhaps, in terms of why we haven't moved to full open access in the way that we'd hoped, and the big deals are up for negotiation, I think, this year. Perhaps, Jane, you could tell us a little bit about what that means. I know it's still ongoing, but give us a sense of where those negotiations are and what it might mean for Leeds or the sector going forwards.
Yes, so we have deals with a whole number of publishers that are negotiated nationally by JISC for the higher education sector, and the deals with the biggest 5 publishers of academic articles in the UK are all coming to an end at the end of this year, at the end of 2025. So that's Elsevier, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, Springer and Sage. So it's an opportunity to think about the kinds of deals that we want from the 1st of January 2026 onwards. So JISC, bearing in mind the review that they undertook last year, the response of the sector, have determined that there's an appetite to do something different, to get a different kind of deal that gets us away from particularly focused on sort of article-based models of these deals, where you're paying, where costs seem to be calculated on a per article basis, and that's driving up publishing of articles, which is driving up the costs. So yeah, it's an opportunity to refocus on what we want from a deal in terms of supporting open research culture, what that means more widely, and what the publisher is doing to support that, and an opportunity to look at how we constrain the costs across the sector as well. So it's as yet unclear as to the deals that are going to be put on the table. I think we're expecting sort of July, August time to get some more information about how those deals might look. I think there's a sense in the sector that to date we've been able, through the big deals, to have pretty much comprehensive access to content and comprehensive access to open publishing in that content, and that actually maybe it's not going to be possible, both from the constraints that publishers might be working with and the constraints that are on us in the higher education sector. It might not be possible for us to actually have deals that cover absolutely everything, and that we might need to be looking at taking smaller sets of content. So there will be, there could possibly be impacts in terms of how we approach the discovery and access of content. Mitigations would include reliance on post-cancellation access, so we will retain access to everything that we've already paid for. Using tools that help our users to find content that is openly accessible. So at Leeds we have Lean Library. And also using document supply, which in recent years has been able to supply articles much more quickly than was the case in the past. And of course, for publishing, it might mean that we no longer have publishing wrapped up in deals, and that maybe what we're looking at is relying on our rights retentions policies in order to be able to publish in an open way that enables us to meet funder and government requirements.
No, thank you. So that's that gives us a real sense of, obviously there's still a lot of uncertainty, as you've expressed, but certainly, again, which cropped up in the conversation with John and Eva, in a UK context, several universities have already pulled out of some of their deals. I know Leeds hasn't yet, but it's already affecting some institutions, isn't it, in the sector, given the constraints on budgets that we're facing. So I suppose what we're saying is, don't panic. They're not necessarily going to affect us in the same way, but it might get to the point where we can't have the same coverages that we've enjoyed over the past few years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so I suppose the question, I'll come to you, Jonathan, in terms of you and I are both open research advisors, and as a university and as a sector, we're obviously doing an awful lot of work to promote a culture of open research, and open access is part of that culture in terms of open access to research articles. So you and I both do a lot of advocacy, don't we, with colleagues, academic colleagues, talking about open research and open access. What do you think are some of the messages we need to get out to colleagues in this context around rights retention?
Oh, good question. I think the most important message around rights retention, I think, is it's almost one of normalizing it and making it less of a thing. I think in a lot of the advocacy sessions that I've done, when you speak to people about rights retention, there's it's almost a sort of tangible surprise that this is something that we're able to do. I think we've spent so many years drilling into academics and researchers that they need to be aware of and think about embargo periods in journals, be that for funder compliance or ref compliance. I think it's something that, while not quite second nature, was always something that they were somewhat aware of in the back of their heads. And then to go to a position where, because of rights retention, it's not something they need to worry about anymore, I think is quite a dramatic shift. And one of the things that I've always clung to and has been a bit of almost a comfort blanket when talking about rights retention is how long some institutions have been doing it for. So thinking to Harvard, who were the kind of almost global pioneers with their 2008 open access policy, there's a really reassuring message there that they've been doing it for the best part of 17 years now without any issues.
It's just habituated, isn't it? I suppose with researchers, they've got to this situation where they routinely are expected to give their copyright over to authors, but there is provision from the conversation with John and Eva that it seems to have been established, I think, in UK copyright law, that actually if there's a prior agreement with the university, which is what we've done as a university, to carve out that copyright permission, that we own the initial license and that can't be superseded by a later license. So I suppose in terms of the messages for our researchers, they don't need to be too concerned about the mechanics of it. We've taken care of that part of it for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that goes a long way to allaying and assuaging some of the concerns that researchers have. I think one of the biggest blockers to rights retention at the moment, I think, is the conflicting messaging that publishers are presenting in that sense. I think it's fairly safe to say that in the last few years that between the institutions that have implemented their own policies and the varying levels of legal advice they've all received, even going back to some of the work on the UK scholarly communications license in the 2010s, I think that was a fairly established and settled agreement that they were on solid legal grounds with doing what they were doing. And that's almost undone to an extent when a author is confronted with a publisher workflow that states the exact opposite of what we're trying to reassure them about. And I couldn't say to what extent that's deliberate from publishers or just them moving at a glacial pace to update their copyright agreements and copyright transfer agreements and license to publish agreements, but it's an obstacle that exists when I think you've got, on the one hand, your institution telling you one thing that you're okay and on solid legal ground, and on the other you've got a publisher telling you to sign an agreement that conflicts with everything you're being told by your institution. I can understand why there is some reluctance forthcoming from academics that are publishing and potentially using rights retention for the first time, but as much as it can be settled and established that carve out exists, it's just trying to stress that we've done our due diligence, been through all the checks necessary to proceed to an institutional policy, and we are ultimately comfortable with that level of risk, if there even is much risk anymore in actually implementing rights retention.
I think that's interesting, though. I mean, thinking back to the conversation I had with John and Eva, and I did ask them explicitly, what is the publisher reaction to this? And their sort of, and the consensus seems to be that it hasn't been particularly strong against it, how it might affect their business models, etc. But that might be at odds with the reality that researchers perhaps are experiencing in their day-to-day experience of actually publishing with specific publishers. I think is what you just sort of suggested, that even though They haven't sort of necessarily expressed back to the universities for the letters that we've sent them asserting this process. That doesn't necessarily mean that researchers aren't coming up against barriers in their day-to-day workflows.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those barriers take many different sort of shapes and forms, and I think most prominent amongst them is the ability for publishers to route authors down a gold or paid for open access route. I think it's almost nigh impossible to publish these days with a journal or a publisher that doesn't have some sort of monetized open access option. I think what I'd refer to as green only or subscription only journals, they almost don't exist anymore, and I think that's become open access because open access has become such a big business.
Did you want to comment on that, Jane? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I think we have seen some publishers respond in ways that are worrying, which you could crudely say are attempting to monetize green open access. So, for example, the article development charge coming from the American Chemical Society, the repository licensing fee that's been put forward by IEEE. I think those are moves that we want to resist because, as we've already said, we have prior rights asserted over the content. There's no reason why we would have to pay to make a version accessible in our institutional repository. But as Jonathan says, when the author is submitting, though, they are confronted with what the publisher chooses to put in front of them as a workflow, and that can route people very quickly down avenues that are paid for. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges that we face going forward if we are going to get to a point where we maybe move away from read and publish deals, but we still want to openly publish. How are we going to be able to support our authors with the many publishers that they publish with? How are we going to make sure that we provide that appropriate guidance and support for all of those different workflows?
I suppose that comes back to, so in my experience, and I don't know if you'd agree, Jonathan, I mean, you and I, we work together quite a lot on sort of advocacy around open research and open access in particular. And I've certainly spoke to a lot of colleagues that aren't that familiar with rights retention. I don't know if that's your experience as well. So if they might not be yet aware of it. And I suppose that's partly what hopefully this conversation is about, trying to raise awareness with our colleagues at Leeds about what it is and why they need to be aware of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the awareness certainly isn't where we'd like it to be. And I think part of the problem with rights retention is that it almost kind of flips the academic publishing business model as we know it on its head in terms of the potential for shaking up how things have been done in the past, which isn't to say that I think it's particularly problematic to publishers' business models. I think as much as there are examples that we can give of publishers that are making life difficult for authors, there are other publishers out there that I think deserve plaudits for what they are doing in terms of embracing open access. I think one that comes to mind off the top of my head is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, and they publish the journal Science, which I think is one of the biggest hitters in sort of cross-disciplinary field. And since Plan S was introduced in 2021, they've embraced the concept of zero embargo open access to all author accepted manuscripts, which I think has been a most welcome development. And while I couldn't say that I've ever had sight of their financial statements, it obviously hasn't had a massive impact on their ability to continue to function and operate as a commercial publisher, which I think is a really important thing, that we have got examples to give to academics when we're going to speak to them and doing that advocacy work, to say that as much as you may come across some big commercial publishers that perhaps are putting barriers in your way, there are people that are making it work. And while I don't think we have a huge amount of sway over where academics are choosing to publish, I think it's important that we do highlight some of the good guys in our advocacy efforts.
I think that sort of summarises quite well where we are as a university and how it relates to the broader picture. I just want to perhaps finish by thinking about, I suppose I'm really interested in the cultural aspects to this and how it intersects with what I've heard referred to as bibliodiversity. You know, this expectation perhaps that the currency of academia is to publish in certain journals with a certain journal impact factor, etc. And some of the questions around the Declaration of Research Assessment, so DORA, that we are signatories to. So I don't, that's any thoughts from you, Jane, on how that might feed into this conversation?
Yes, it's definitely related, isn't it? Research culture has grown up over centuries, hasn't it? And the tradition of publishing in these journals that have reputations. So to me, it's not surprising, I guess, that it's that a shift is going to take time and patience, and I do think it must be very, very difficult for our researchers because they're affiliated to a particular discipline. It is their life's work, isn't it? And being part of that discipline, part of that community of research, and often the journal is integral to that community, or a set of journals are integral to that community. So I think it's definitely a challenge. And I'm not sure that there are easy answers to the challenge, but I do think we have to keep kind of engaging in conversation and finding ways in which we can move things forward in a way that enables us to work well with our academic colleagues.
And along those lines as well, perhaps it's just worth quickly mentioning some of the work that I know both you and Jonathan are involved in. What's it called? The Open Access Fund. How do you describe it? This is about supporting Diamond Open Access, for example, and different models of open access.
Yeah, this is it's called the Open Access Support Fund, which was something that we launched early last year.
Yes, it was.
And it's the aim and principle behind it is to try and support what we'll give a very sort of broad name to of open access or open initiatives, which covers a huge array of things. It could be publishing initiatives, it could be open tools such as the Directory of Open Access Journals, anything and everything really that has got anything to do with open, but with a very important caveat that it doesn't involve any author or kind of reader facing charges. So I think we're trying to support collective funding models for these initiatives, and try and move away from article processing charges, book processing charges. I think some of the models that I think that we've seen that have had problems in the past and perhaps contributed to the aforementioned delays or lack of progress to transitioning towards open access.
Yeah, no, thank you. And to finish off, Jane, we can reassure colleagues, can't we, that we'll be doing a lot more work in this area. We'll be doing a lot more work around communicating these issues to colleagues, having more conversations with researchers, etc. Can you give us any sort of sense of what we'll be doing over the next 12 months? I know we're still planning, but...
Yeah, I mean, we very much want to keep the conversation going with colleagues across the institution, because the decisions that we make about the deals that we have with publishers, the access we give to content, avenues for publishing, they have to be institutional decisions. They have to be owned by the institution. So it's essential that we work with colleagues across the institution. And I think what Jonathan was saying there about the Open Access Support Fund is, and again that conversation going back to the culture piece as well, is that we, that there are lots of different ways, aren't there, of supporting open access. And I think at the moment it's around experimenting, isn't it, and working with different opportunities that might present themselves. I mean, clearly we need to keep research impact, research visibility. they're front and central, and we have things like the ref as well that are critical. But we also need to be thinking about, well, what are the opportunities that might help us work to generate that more open research culture. And I was really struck by something in the last podcast, actually, around rights retention, where one of your colleagues on the call, Nick, she talked about rights retention being giving authors, giving universities the mechanisms to think about how you make your research visible and open. So giving you the control and the choice to be able to do that. And I think that's a really good thing to hold on to.
Yeah, no, I know it struck me in the same way, actually. I know exactly what you're talking about when Eva mentioned that. So that's a good way to sort of conclude and bring it back to that previous conversation with John and Eva. So thank you both very much, and thanks for your time, and I'll let you get off. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for listening to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on our brand new episodes. And if you're enjoying the discussions, give us some love by dropping a 5-star rating and written review, as it helps other research culturists find us. And please share with a friend and show them how to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and here's to you and your research culture.